Collington. Joining me, as always, Mr. Kevin Durso. Kevin, how's it going today?
It's going well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a busy couple of days. It's been a busy couple of weeks, honestly, surrounding the trade deadline. And as we're diving into that, I just wanted to get you off the top here and make sure you're following us on social media at YWT Podcast. Go find us on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, think about hitting that subscribe button. It really helps us out. The like button, too. We're YWT Podcast everywhere. Kevin is Kevin_Durso everywhere except for Blue Sky, where it's just at Kevin Durso. So
very relevant today, by the way.
Very relevant today. When one site goes down, activity on the other may pick up a little. So, All right. Speaking of activity on social media, the big topic in today's show really is the trade deadline, and I think a lot of us follow that on social media pretty closely. So we had some deals, and the Flyers were more active than they've been in a lot of recent years.
Oh, yeah.
Quite frankly, the whole trade deadline was one of the most exciting we've seen in a very long time.
Yeah,
the quality of deals was unreal.
The fact that Thursday night you felt like you couldn't go to sleep because who knows what's going to happen. I mean,
there was a deal being talked about later in the evening.
Sure, and as soon as I saw the keywords of what was involved with that one, I was up for another hour and a half afterwards, just keeping an eye on it because,
and then it ended up breaking at 3:04 the following day that it was officially done.
No, the one I think you're thinking of is way earlier than that. It was one something in the afternoon or something like that. But it had layers. Don't get me wrong. Like by the morning, it was a totally different report than what was at whatever it was at 12:30 o'clock in the morning.
Of course, and teasing around about it. Obviously, that is the Mikko Rantanen deal. A
right.
couple weeks ago, he goes to Carolina. Wasn't working out. He apparently told them that he wouldn't play for them and wouldn't sign with them long term. So
yeah, there's going to be a whole lot more. There's a whole lot more that we don't know yet about this story that we maybe will in the future. Maybe we'll never know. But if we never know, it'll always be speculation. If we do find out, it'll be a great story, I'm sure.
Are the documentary cameras there? I know they're filming another season of Inside the NHL, and I believe Seth Jarvis is one of the names. Is he not?
He would be, but see, I don't. Well, I mean,
what I'm saying is there's been cameras in Carolina this season. It's not unreasonable to think that there may be some there now. And again, it's not focused on Rantanen, but hey,
no, but you're highlighting a player, right, you're highlighting a player who's there while they're teammates for even just a short period of time.
Yep.
The only thing I can imagine is that whatever, like the story you're talking about is the Brindamore clip, the clip that was out. I can only imagine that whatever he's talking about was already out there, like immediately upon when he showed up. So I don't think the cameras would have followed him at that point or been around him per se, because it was like, it might be before. Honestly, that's usually your first. Typically, that's your first meeting, is it not? Like general manager and head coach, and then you meet the team. So I don't think Jarvis ever came into contact with Rantanen before it would have even been out there to the coach. At least, hey, I don't want to stay.
At the same time, it did become kind of a topic of public speculation while he was there, right? And if there's cameras in the room and the media is talking about it, or even if it's just social media that's talking about it,
it's the build up to it too, right? Like you're talking about it. The fact that for an entire week, I would say it was at least floated like that. This is basically like the miniature timeline, or like the deadline isn't just a deadline to move him. It was, if they're going to sign him, they probably should do it now. And there was a lot of stuff. Like I remember reading something somewhere, I forget who it was from or whatever, but there was also a thing about just say, screw it. Like, who cares about whether or not he wants to re-sign with you or not? You acquired him, finish out the year, take your chances, go for a run, because that's what you supposedly made the trade for, right? Was to go on a cup run with him. Even if he wants to leave, let him sign it on July 1st, like all other free agents do. You have his rights right now, unless it was going to cause that much of a problem. That's why I'm saying we don't have the whole story.
Well, right. I was going to say the other side of it is, right, there's two types of trades at the trade deadline. There's trade for a rental and there's trade with an extension, right? When we're talking about high-end players like Mikko Rantanen, Mitch Marner's name ended up getting floated around in that. We can touch on that if we want, but
that was interesting.
But
I'd love to know. I'd love to know who gives that tidbit of information, by the way, because
who do you think gives that tidbit of information with that particular player?
The agent.
Hello. who may or may not have a long-standing relationship with a member of the local media. Come
No,
on.
it's 1,000%. It was like I knew exactly what the point of that was. It's not to sit there and say they were close on a deal. Toronto's hanging up the freaking phone on that one right now. It's not that.
Well,
It's
but
no,
are
no,
they?
but well, no. I think right now, I think they are, because I think that their goal is figure out a way to re-sign him. But the idea is that someone is going to put it out there to give you the impression things might not be all happy-go-lucky in Toronto.
I mean, the organization took it far enough that they asked the player. Clearly, they were taking the offer at least somewhat seriously.
Well, that's true too. And then okay, and that's the thing.
Right, because he's got a no move clause. You asked him to move it.
That's why I'm saying there's all sorts of pieces of information, because then it turns into maybe the most daunting thing about that whole situation then is that essentially, okay, good point. You brought up that they asked the player and he obviously said no, right? So that means basically within a span of how many days since all this kind of came out, it had to be Saturday at the earliest, because it was after the deadline was over. So we're doing it. It's within like the last 72 hours at this point. You found out that 2 major players don't want to be in Carolina.
Okay, that's different. Let's be honest. That is not the same thing. Mitch Marner's a hometown kid. He's been a Leaf his whole career. It's not the same.
It may not be
the same.
But it does matter.
Now, if Colorado had offered Rantanen and Marner 1-for-1, okay, we can have a conversation. That's pretty similar. Come on. We both know that, it's apples and oranges a little bit there.
Oh wait, you're talking about the market type?
Yeah.
No, I get that, but I'm saying if you're Carolina and you're supposed to be a team that, like I put up, like I put in the group text, your windows right now.
Not even the market type, just the fact that Marner didn't say no because it's Carolina. He would have said no to anything because he wants to stay in Toronto.
Right. Well, and that's why
Dallas or Colorado or anybody.
Well, okay, and maybe it's also because of the fact that the two teams are kind of similar right now. Toronto's windows now too, quite frankly.
Exactly. Well, and I get why Eric calls Brad Treliving, right? It makes sense.
Sure. Well, anybody calls. Guess what? I saw something about, so I guess this was Saturday, before Saturday pregame. Danny Briere went on Snow the goalie, pops on their pregame show like he typically does a couple times, and it was brought up that when they asked about something or other, like about what kind of calls you take, is there anybody else or whatever, he brought up, you're always listening to whatever and you're always gauging what could be available. And he got like this smile about it, as if to say, yeah, you know what? Maybe I called on Rantanen too, for all you know. If it was out there that he was available and you could try to sign the guy, maybe I'm thinking that too, just to ask, not even to take it that seriously, but just to ask the question.
What it would be.
Right. Just to entertain the idea for a second. And that's set up to what he could be doing later, obviously.
I was going to say, and we'll get into that kind of a little bit here, but I think that when all is said and done, 5 years from now, when the Flyers are either, contender or have a new GM and are rebuilding again, I think you're going to look back at this trade deadline and go, okay, this was the turning point. And we'll talk about it as we kind of dive into the moves here. And I think it starts with, and we can get right into
well, the only other thing
the
I was
big move.
Right. The only thing I was going to bring up was to go back to the Marner thing for one second, with the no trade clause thing. There's a difference between, and we'll get to this guy as well. I'll just throw his name out there because it happened. Andrei Kuzmenko waived his no trade clause to be in Philadelphia to begin with, right? There's a difference between being on a team like Toronto right now, where it's win now mode and you're a key part of that, and saying no. Like you're right. I know he's a Toronto kid. I get that stuff.
And I think that at the end of the day, I think that's the biggest factor.
It is, but I think that you're willing to move on from that aspect of it if you can sense the windows closing and they're basically trying to tell you it's the beginning of the end. You're only one part of this. It's going to be more. Like, we're about to blow it all up.
Oh, if they don't make it out of the first round this year, Toronto is in for some seismic roster changes.
I'm sure.
No doubt.
But what I'm saying is that there's a difference between being on a team that is very clearly at that stage where it's like, okay, you're going to make the playoffs. You're going to have a shot at it because, quite frankly, in the Eastern Conference, just about everybody feels like they've got a shot at it. So you might as well take your chance. Your window to at least get there could be wide open at this moment, especially with your current core that they keep wheeling back out there every year. When it starts to close in on you that you're near the beginning of the end, like here's an example, and they didn't trade a guy like this, but let's say the Rangers go to Mika Zibanejad or Chris Kreider and say, we want to make it, or like we have an offer, you need to waive a no move clause or something like that.
Which
And you're
may or may not
sensing,
have been rumored at
right,
points this year.
and you're sensing the beginning of the end with that core, because you are not a guarantee. Like, okay, they're hovering around the playoffs, but you're not a guarantee. It's been a disappointing year. They might be doing what they feel like they have to do as an organization to get out of that and get back to the other stats. And if you as a player can sense it's not my time, okay, I'll do another one for you. Why is Brad Marchand going to play for the Florida Panthers? Because Boston was not making it. And when they realize they're not making it, a player who wants to go for it one more time is willing to do it.
Don Sweeney wins the most hurtless move of the deadline, by the way, because your captain is in the media begging to stay and you trade him for a second round pick. And like, listen, I know the conditions are such that it's pretty likely to turn into a first. I get that. But still, man, ugh, that's a heartbreaker for Boston fans.
Well, it's weird. There's like, I got a buddy who's a big Boston fan, is from there. All that.
I'm married to one. Yep.
He was okay with the deal. He said it's going to be weird as hell to see him in another jersey, obviously, when the time comes.
Especially Florida.
But like at one point in time, he's like, I really hope this isn't where it is. Like, I'm okay with trading him. I just really hope that this is wrong and like that it's not true. And it was true, obviously. But like as the entire deadline played out for Boston anyway, he sent me text messages with like, okay, Coyle, great, like kind of like return. That's good. And quite legitimately texted me in that moment and goes, if Carlos traded in the next 30 minutes, I'm thrilled. And sure enough, he was traded too. And you get all those pieces.
It's great.
Now, granted, here's the thing that I think is, I don't want to call it a touchy subject for Boston, but this is the thing that, because look, when you've been the team that Boston has been for all of the years they've been, and it starts to slip, and you fired another head coach, and that's the one thing that he keeps coming back to whenever we talk about this is Neely and Sweeney have had multiple head coaches and multiple chances to turn that part of this thing over. Who knows how long they inherit Claude Julien. He's out. They, everything with Jim Montgomery this past year, the way that it ended with Bruce Cassidy in there, all that type of stuff. How many different times are they going to go through? And guess what? And he's right about this when we talked about it, because Joe Sacco's not keeping the job at the end of the year. He's been the interim, and they're going to find somebody else, and it'll be the next high profile level kind of guy who they bring in and try to do this again. And unless
they go with a rebuild coach for a couple of years, like you never know.
They don't know the word either. That's the problem. It's a harsh, because it's the scenario that the way he talks about it. I sit there and I go, you're preaching to the choir. I've lived this covering the team that I cover for the previous 5 years. In our case, when we talk about it, with the lack of an ownership presence, not necessarily like this was past Snyder at this point, but that's pretty much what the Dakes are to Boston at this point, is that kind of thing. You've had the president, Neely, is in there until the ownership says get out. That's who controls that position. Neely keeps Sweeney employed when he probably should be on the hot seat for all of the shortcomings pretty much since the record-setting season and then first round exit. I get they won a playoff round last year, but you got lucky with stopgaps for a year, and then this year you were ready. And stand in front of people and say we didn't blow it up. Like, come on, you did.
Well, the difference here is that in Boston moving forward, as far as turning a retool around, you already have your goalie, right? Jeremy Swayman is theoretically entering his absolute prime. You still have prime Charlie McAvoy, who is an elite defenseman in the NHL, and you have prime David Pastrnak for another year or two.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't, by the way, Boston fans, I know you probably don't want to hear it, but pasta in the summer. Hello.
Yeah, I don't know about that, because see, I think that their idea is going to be turn it over quickly. So you know what's coming from Don Sweeney at this point? A 2021 Chuck Fletcher off season. He's gonna try. It's gonna be aggressive retool. Get ready for it.
That worked out really well.
But that's exactly where their heads are at. They're gonna hire some high profile coaches on the market. They're gonna bring in players. Now they moved off of this. They might go out there. Who knows? There's no commitment with Marchand. They might go out and try to sign him back.
I assume they'll at least call him.
Right. But I'm saying that it doesn't. It just doesn't equate to them moving in the right direction by any sense. Like getting all this stuff back that they got back is great, but you got to know what to do with it after that. And I don't sense they're going to do with what they probably should do with it. Is the point? I think they're gonna go full retool.
That's fair. It'll be interesting to see how Boston handles it. This is not a Boston Bruins show. We do have Flyers to talk about here. I think we should transition.
No, we are, because actually, I'm glad I got to the idea of the aggressive retool thing early enough, because when we go over the number of things that have happened with the Flyers, no,
I know what you're talking about,
but it's why I don't understand. Like, let's just start with the trades that happened, and we'll go to one, and then we'll go into kind of like. Because there's really only one that didn't, if we're being serious.
Right. So going into the trade deadline, there were two major names we heard about, and then a couple others that kind of were, I don't even want to say floated, but that were whispered about.
Well, no, so here's the best way I can put it. In all of my spots on 97.3 over the course of the last month and a half or whatever, if trade talk came up, this goes back as far as I went on the air and within the hour before the game started on January 30th. Now you know where I'm going to go with this. And I go on the air, a question about stuff with whatever. I don't know how I got on the deadline stuff, unless it was the idea of what could they trade or something like that. I don't know if it came up like that, but whatever. My point was about, you had the game that they were playing that night against the Islanders, and you had you had 4 games in a week to follow, 2 on the road and then 2 at home, and then 4 nations hit. And after 4 nations, you were going to come back and you were only going to play 6 games, and then hello, trade deadline's here. You've got to decide what you are, and it's time to make these decisions. And basically, I kind of, because we're also, let's remember, by that point, we are 6 weeks out from the trade deadline. I kind of just casually said, you're just going to hear all the same names you've been hearing for a while. Scott Laughton, Rasmus Ristolainen. You'll probably hear some Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost. By the end of the night, Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost were headed to Calgary. That's where it started. Whole week build up to the trade deadline. Of course, Scott Laughton's name's at the top of the list, and eventually, as we'll get to, that happens. And I sit there and I bring up Ristolainen a little bit, because that's been there this whole time. And I go, there's been some stuff about they might flip Andrei Kuzmenko, and I wonder if there's anything they could do for Erik Johnson. So by the time all was said and done, I gave people 6 names over 6 weeks, and 5 of them got traded. You know what I mean? Like, not to call it predictable, it was just, it all lined up that way. And sure enough, that's how busy they were, that they actually did all of these things. Like, if you would, like, certainly if you would have told me on the day that I first brought up Farabee Frost, like, oh, you're probably gonna hear some stuff, and it might be like, this might be 3 weeks from now or something. And instead it was that night. It's like, oh, well, okay then. And it was weird, because you don't tend to think of going in January 31st, for lack of a better term, we're going to punt the season. You weren't getting, based on that move, you weren't getting Chuck Fletcher. We're only 5 out of wild card spot. You were getting, it's January 31st. I don't care that there's what, at that point in time, there was 30-something games to go, probably. 30 on the dot or something like that. I don't care. I'm making a move.
Well, and he made those moves, and Kuzmenko comes in, Peltier comes in. Obviously, the draft capital goes a little bit further down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as we're diving into the moves here, I did just want to address. You mentioned 6 guys. You mentioned that 5 of them got traded. Rasmus Ristolainen didn't get moved. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you're listening to the show, you know that. Couple things left on that, right? And all these things can all be true at the same time. Mm-hmm. 1, he's got several years left. 2, they don't mind having him on the roster. They think he is helpful. It's good to have around the young guys. He is a genuine contributor to the team. And also, they can still trade him this summer. Like, all those things remain true. Mm-hmm. Danny Briere made it pretty clear before the deadline that the price was going to be high on Risto. There's a lot of term left. I've heard a prospect, maybe plus. Like, the ask was up there for sure.
Right.
And again, it was because Danny Briere did not feel the need to move him. There was no urgency in it. So okay, as we're diving into that, I just wanted to kind of address Rasmus Ristolainen off the top, and not moving him is not a failure of the Danny Briere regime.
Right.
But okay, diving into the moves that they did make, I think the big move, kind of the headline move, as far as one of the longer tenured members of the roster, Scott Laughton is now a Toronto Maple Leaf. His hometown team, so I did just want to mention that off the top, that it is good for him personally. He's going home to be around friends and family. He's had a little bit of a difficult personal season, so it is good for him to be around his friends and family. But as far as it concerns the Philadelphia Flyers, they sent Scott Laughton as well as a fourth in next year's draft and a sixth in 2027. Oh, I'm sorry. The fourth is this year. This graphic is awful. The fourth is in this year's draft. The sixth is in 2027. And in return, the Flyers can receive a conditional 2027 first round draft pick. Top 10 protected slides to 28 if the condition is met. And Nikita Grebenkin, who was a fifth round pick by the Toronto Maple Leafs, has really, really impressed in his development. He's a bit of a bigger kid. He plays even bigger than his actual frame is.
Right.
Kevin, let's break this down here. Laughton out, Grebenkin in, plus some draft capital. What do you think?
Well, it was the right decision. That's what it is. I mean, you got what you were asking for. You wanted the first round pick or a first round equivalent, and you got it. There's really not much more to say about it than that. I mean, I don't think you're seeing. I know everybody gets infatuated with, as soon as something comes over that is there or one step away, let's put it, you want to see him. So everybody's going nuts about Grebenkin. I understand why. I don't think you're seeing him for the rest of the year. I think he's going to be in the minors, and that's the way it's going to be. Let's face it, and we'll get into the other, like I said, we'll get into the other moves, but once we get through the other moves, they made 3 of their 4 post-deadline call-ups right away. So they only have one more, and I don't think it's going to be on Grebenkin. I think it's going to be on somebody else down the line.
That they're looking to get a
I mean, let's put it this way. For all I know, and I hope that this saga is over for the rest of this season at least, but Kolosov got sent down. It could be Kolosov. Short of it being for emergency purposes, obviously, because emergency doesn't count. If they need a goalie and they call him up, they need a goalie. But if they don't and they say, let's see him anyway, that might be the guy.
Yeah, fair enough. But as it sits, obviously, again, Scott Laughton out, which is it hurts your locker room culture, right? Danny Briere talked about it in his availability on trade deadline day. Said it was, one of the hardest things he's had to do as general manager, trading a former teammate. Like, he played with Scott Laughton, and
wasn't the only former teammate he ended up trading that day.
That's funny. A little different. The other one was a favor, but
no, but he joked about it. Like, yeah, it's all the old teammates, pretty much, right?
It's really funny.
But let's face it, that let's stick to the Laughton one for a second, more than the other guys that eventually get moved, because the fact of the matter is, okay, I know that there's a lot of people who were probably doubting that this would ever happen, that they were so attached to Scott Laughton that, it's never going to happen. They're never going to move him. The price is going to be way too high, et cetera, et cetera. And listen, as much as I'll agree with that, because I wasn't going to go off of anything until I saw it, for sure. Like, yeah, he's attached to all these teams. And let's face it, despite whatever else you think you may have heard over the course of the week or any other report, Toronto stood out more than anybody all the time, because it's just been such a natural fit. It felt like the right place that he was going to go when the time came. But until it was done, you weren't going to believe it. Now, I'm going to take you back, though, to Thursday. Because almost, like, sometimes you can go into the building, and when you've gone as many times as I have, you just kind of get a sense that you think you're watching something, and you just pick up the vibe of the game right away.
Stadium Series 2019 was that?
The
game before Wayne Simmons was traded.
As much as like, that's true that it was. Mm-hmm. I'll even do the Claude Giroux game, the 1000th game for that. Now, hang on. There was no, I mean, it was before Wayne Simmons. It was a Stadium Series game, so of course there was fanfare around that whole thing. But there wasn't like everybody just kind of got through the end of that, just kind of knowing that might be it. Be prepared for it to be it, but there was no like let's put it this way. It was Claude Giroux's 1000th game. They pulled out all the stops, big ceremony at the beginning, wouldn't let him leave the ice at the end of the thing until he skated around. You knew exactly what you were watching. It was a farewell show. That was the end. With Simmons, you didn't completely know. Like it's you sensed it, but they didn't give you that, right? Like they didn't give you some big pomp and circumstance of go take a bow kind of deal.
I've seen the mic'd up. They knew.
Oh, they knew. I'm sure. Like, well, because the thing in the locker room wouldn't happen without it.
I know.
But I'm saying from the fan perspective, you didn't get that moment. And Laughton's been here for a long time, 12 seasons.
It's the second longest tenured Flyer.
There wasn't an on ice moment like when it was like the closest thing you got was he was in the starting lineup for the game. Now, granted, so was Rasmus Ristolainen. So if anything happened with both of them, you were covering your bases. Let's just put it that way. But what I'm getting at is that even though there was no moment, there was little body language things the players had. You got the sense the players were already sensing it was coming. And
I mean, Scott knew when he posted the Last Supper picture that it was a distinct possibility.
See, I don't even go that far with it. Like, distinct possibility is selling that short. I think that was acceptance.
I agree. That's
understanding this might really be at this time.
Gone. Right.
And as much as he's saying have fun with it, think about the other guy who was behind the whole thing to begin with. He got moved too.
Yep.
And there's an element where somebody like that who's played as long as Erik Johnson has probably has a sense from either being a teammate of a guy or being the guy that you know when you're going to move. And I think by this point, Laughton kind of accepted the fact that thank you for everything that you have done as a leader in this room over the last 2 seasons in particular, as the culture has had to grow. But let's face facts. You're 30. And in 2 more years, if we let you play out the rest of this year and next year for your contract, in 2 more years, I don't think they're looking for a 32-year-old Scott Laughton to be one of the guys now. You want somebody else, Like, how many times have we said that Noah Cates is probably going to be the guy who fills that role and just has a little bit more of a ceiling?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
That's
like,
fair. Yeah. Well, listen,
so
we talked a lot on this show about the power vacuum left behind when Claude Giroux was traded. And for a while, Kevin Hayes, it seemed, kind of stepped into that role.
okay,
Obviously, that locker room wasn't necessarily the healthiest. There may have been some division, some issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's also because of what came after. But yes,
during that, and then after that Kevin Hayes locker room era, I'm willing to bet, as someone who isn't around the team as much as you, and is around the team nowhere near as much as like the locker room everyday guys, it seems to me like Scott Laughton was kind of the leader of that room.
Oh, for sure.
And right, in a way that he's been here a decade. No disrespect to Sean Couturier, but he's been healthy for the last couple of years during all of this kind of big roster overhaul.
Yep.
And it seemed like he was kind of the leader of that room. And now by trading him, you are banking on the fact that he has sown enough seeds, that the locker room is in a good spot, that, he taught good lessons. I do just want to take one quick second here and shout out Scott Laughton for being such a fantastic person, a humanitarian.
Oh, God, yeah.
Huge supporter of the local Pride community. That will go missed in this organization, especially with Joel Farabee, the other ambassador, being traded away this season also. So I'm hoping that some guys in that locker room step up to fill that void. But even
that'll
just
depend on who's even here next year. Yeah.
Of course, but even just from sure, but there's guys that we know are going to be here, right? Like, there's guys with long-term contracts. There are.
I know you're talking about a Travis Konechny and Owen Tippett. Somebody take on these things. Owen Tippett's big.
Anybody.
Yeah, like Owen Tippett's really big on the it's the Learn to Skate program, I think, or something like that. And he and his wife are behind that. all sorts of ways. You take a guy like Garnet Hathaway, who has a lot of community ties. Like, yeah, you just want to see people jump onto certain things. I will tell you.
And hopefully some of that passes on to even the younger generation too, because most of the guys you mentioned there, other than Tippett, are a little bit older. So
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, hopefully these younger guys step up into leadership roles. But yeah,
well, and here's the thing. So now let me put you into my perspective for a minute when you go into that too, because you also have to. It's a weird week. The entire week is a little weird because you're sitting there knowing what is possibly going to happen. I'm sitting there Thursday night going, here's a player that I've watched. But in particular, here's a player that, as far as I'm concerned, practically for me has been here every single game I've covered. Just about. I mean, he was pretty much a regular from 2014-15 on. He debuted in 2012-13, but like...
And has never missed a bunch of time. He's always been a pretty healthy player.
And obviously somebody that I've been able to be around, talk to on occasion. Like, you know what kind of guy he is. You know, fierce competitor on the ice, great guy off the ice, you know, definitely that type of leader. And here's the thing, though, as much as he will be missed, and I don't discount that for anything. And listen, this is why we're not going to spend a whole ton of time on the results, but this is why you get the kind of game you saw on Thursday. It's why you get the kind of game you saw on Saturday. There's just no time to kind of take the human element out of it and say, just go play.
And I talked about it earlier this season when Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost got traded, that you're already taking a big chunk out of that locker room, though you can tell those guys loved those two. And it's the same thing here. And you have now taken 3 big old gouges out of your locker room, out of culture, that word that you've been saying for the last, basically since the second Danny Briere took over, since the second John Tortorella took over, we've been talking about the culture. And you
use all the words, the culture, the standard, everything. Yes.
And the truculence anyway. And you just dealt 3 heavy body blows to that over the course of this season. So as we talk about the Flyers kind of turning the corner and maybe starting to add some assets in the summer, right? The next time you have the opportunity at this point, they have to keep that into account, that their culture is, I don't want to say at risk, because that sounds like a negative thing.
Right.
Their
this is the test, though.
Their culture has taken some big shots. And if you bring in a couple of bad apples, it can go sour again in a hurry.
Well, here's the way I'll take this, because yes, you're right about anybody from the outside. Sure, of course. Anytime you take the chance on adding somebody from the outside, you take the chance of what could this do inside the room. Totally agree. This is also a test for everybody here, because now that you've actually made the move. You teed up the move by sitting here saying, the only reason we feel like we can do this is because the room has grown enough that we feel like we can do this. Your coach has said that. Your general manager has said that. Your president of hockey operations has said that. And if that doesn't prove to be true, that's a problem.
I agree. And I will say, I think from what we see, and again, it's not a ton, we have a much more limited view than those people. From what we see on the ice, it looks like their culture is pretty good.
Usually, people are and I'm saying, because people are going to be really sour over the way that the weekend went. It's disjointed. It just doesn't look there. There's frustration setting in because of where it's all going. And in fairness, this is the hard part of this stretch of the season. Like, get used to it right now. If I was willing to sit here and tell you that when a trade went down with Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost, 6 weeks ago, that it felt like you were punting the season, then you have really formally given it the boot now. And that's with as much as that's the right decision to sell, the right decision to understand that you're not there. Good luck telling the players that are being told, compete with everything, we're trying to win games, that you don't have you have even less talent than you had 2 days earlier. Go try to win. And oh, by the way, it's not going to matter, because we're telling you already it's over.
Well, and your coach isn't going to accept subpar efforts. We'll talk about that a little later on in the show. You might
He's
just see the
not
bench.
he's not going to accept it, but the hard part is like, and here's the thing. You use a key word there. He's not going to accept subpar effort. I don't think that the effort was really lacking during the course of some of these games that we saw over the weekend. It's everything else. You're going to make
Execution, it's the
bad
talent.
right. You just you're not going to be good enough. Like it is. I'm not going to use the word that John Tortorella does not like to use, but it is as indirect of doing that as you can get by taking you've like the way I described it on, and I didn't use that word on the radio either, but the way that I described it was you took away 4 forwards over the last 6 weeks. You have to fill that somehow or other, and when you do, it's definitely not going to equate to being better.
Last year at the trade deadline, the Flyers were in a divisional playoff spot, and we saw some signs of trouble, but things were still looking pretty good. You trade away Sean Walker, Jamie Drysdale gets hurt, Nick Seeler gets hurt. I think Rasmus Ristolainen was hurt too at that point.
Yeah, he missed the rest of the year.
Right, and the season falls apart. This year they kind of did that in the forward core. Thankfully, there hasn't been too much as far as injury goes, but the surgery this year was focused on removal from the forwards for the most part, and
right.
And again, it between last year and this year, the roster has been pretty significantly overhauled. I think, and we've talked about this a lot, Danny Briere has kind of alluded to this. This is the summer where the turning point begins, right? You talk about Danny Briere making some cheeky little phone calls, oh, maybe we called about Mikko Rantanen. I think the name that he
he didn't say that.
I know.
He gives a look
I know.
And believe me, as somebody who has passed him in the hallway, been on the elevator with him coming up before a game, you can tell at this time of year when the wheels are turning about what can I do. But he's definitely always thinking.
Okay, but what I think he might have done, I don't think he called. I don't think he called about Mikko Rantanen. I think that's probably pretty unlikely because it just doesn't make any sense right now. I think he may have called about Elias Pettersson because that name
could be. Who knows?
Right, that name came up as theoretically available again in the days leading up to the trade deadline. Obviously, nothing happened, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I know this is a name that I've been saying for months. I wouldn't be surprised if the Flyers are heavily in on those conversations at the draft.
Possibly. I mean, I'm not going to start throwing names around right now because it's too fresh. But to your point, it's where I think part of this goes. Like one of the things I feel like I've said, I don't know if I've said it to you. I know I've said it on the radio. I think I might have said it on our last show. They've got 7 picks in the first 2 rounds of this year's draft. Do I see them making 7 picks? Absolutely not. Now, I don't know whether that equates to we're trading some of the picks in a package to get higher and get like 4 really good players instead of 7. You could take that approach. You could use mix and match, do whatever you got to. Right. You could mix and match, do whatever the hell you want to with the 7 picks to get 3 or 4 really solid players. Like you know what you could turn that kind of draft into, and I know that this is not touted as like a great draft by any stretch. Like it's great at the top and then it kind of fizzles out after 10, 15 kind of range, right?
Yeah, the usual, yeah.
Which is it is the usual. And then usually it means you got to find the finds, right? You got to have the thing. What you almost have the ability to potentially try to do if you narrow it down to say 3 or 4 picks out of from the 7 that you trade around, you figure out where you're going. You want
shots in that top 12.
It's not about no. My answer wasn't going to be about where you end up picking. I'm talking about the result. Kind of feels like it has to come away. If you narrow yourself down to, we're going to make a trade to get wherever it lies. There's a player we want to get. If we can move up to, let's use 12 for your example. Like let's say they happen to get a top 5 pick with their own. Let's try to take the other 2 firsts and get 12 or 13. Let's just say, let's try to move a couple of the seconds and see if we can't sneak our way back into the bottom of the first round or the first pick of the second round or something. And what you're going to try to replicate is, can you have a draft year like Dallas had in 2017 where you come away with the defenseman, the goalie, and one of the forwards all in one shot?
Robertson?
That was Robertson. Yeah, but and here's the catch. Think about all the players we know very well who went number 2 in that draft, obviously.
I love Miro Heiskanen. Oh,
Well, yeah, he went. I'm talking about the guy who
he
went
went 3.
before
You're
him.
talking Kel McCarr. Okay.
No.
No.
Number 2.
Wait. Oh,
The
never
only
mind.
one
Yeah,
who didn't pan out in the top 5.
I have blanked that pick out of my mind because
No,
Bobby
I get
Clark's
that.
an idiot.
But hang on. I get this. What I'm trying to say though is that okay, number 3, you get a stud defenseman. That makes total sense. You do the semi-risky thing because not a lot of teams go there and pick a goalie at 26. Not a lot of teams go goalie first round. He better be somebody special to pick a goalie in the first round, and they do pick a guy who is pretty special.
Yeah.
One of the top goalies in
Jake Ottinger's really good.
Exactly.
Yep.
So then what? You get into the second round. It's not supposed to be, but when we look back on it, it's not supposed to be that great of a draft. But the guy who was picked 39th has put together a better career than guys in the top 10.
Who might that be?
Well, beyond the one that you're obviously thinking, how about the guy who scored the first goal of the game between the Flyers and Devils on Sunday? He was in that draft.
Oh, he was in that draft.
Yeah. Has he panned out the way that guys who went in other places have? Absolutely not. But that's what I'm saying. You've got to be the team that not only finds the right guy, but brings him up the right way. And that's how you'll have success with it. Now, that's one way to go, is to trade a bunch of those picks for other picks if you want to move around or whatever. And I actually wrote it down. I think this is based on after yesterday. If it's not and it's a few positions off, so be it. But it's close enough. If the season ended based on yesterday's results, and we just go by the reverse order stuff, not knowing the playoff stuff yet.
Yeah, nice and easy.
They would have their own first round pick would be 7th, which is okay. Could bear for that to be maybe a little lower and give yourself a better shot at the lottery.
Yeah.
Well, because here's the thing, I think they're in a win-win situation if they pick top 5, and then have the shot by being in the top 5 to move to obviously like 1. But you want to settle even at 5 because I think you can get one of these young centers at 5.
Right now, the Philadelphia Flyers are 2 points ahead of Pittsburgh and 4 points.
Oh, I was going to get into that later on in the show.
Yeah, Seattle would currently have the 5th pick, obviously lottery withstanding.
By the way, Pittsburgh and Anaheim win on Sunday after you lose, so it just furthers that.
After you lose to Seattle on Saturday, it's been a good weekend for the tank.
Yeah, kind of has, hasn't it?
It's been a good weekend for
the indirect tank, obviously, because they're not trying to purposely lose, but they're getting
right. Again, when I say tank, I do not mean that players are tanking games. I mean that the management has tanked the roster.
No, sure, they definitely have heard it. All right, yes. So anyway, their pick would be 7th if the season ended today.
Okay.
Or after yesterday's games. Colorado's pick, which they have, would be 23rd. Edmonton's pick would be 24th.
Beautiful.
That's not bad because, and it's not bad for 2 reasons. Even like this is not factoring in the playoff stuff. The good news about the playoffs is one of those teams is probably getting bounced in the first round because thank you, Gary, for the playoff structure.
Yep. So that pick is probably
probably hovering around 20. Let's be real. And then at that point, I don't care if you do end up picking 32nd again.
And oh, by the way, one more tiny little asterisk on that Dallas masterclass. We talked about Mikko Rantanen earlier. He went to Dallas, so he's on that team, and that team is an absolute wagon.
Oh, I was
spoiler alert, Stanley Cup pick. Anyway,
that wasn't yeah, but why were you bringing that part up? Because Rantanen wasn't that draft.
Well, no. I just mean in general, like since we're talking about Dallas, they're the ones who ended up getting Rantanen. We talked about Dallas earlier, and I didn't think we talked about
you and I both know. I love the way they've constructed their team. It goes beyond that. Like let's be real.
They're taking a huge shot, and I love it.
Well, sure they are. You get a player like Rantanen. I've loved Rantanen since his draft year, by the way. I think he was always bound to be a great player. He ended up in the right spot to be great with McKinnon next to him for so many years, obviously.
Fair enough.
You throw him on that one. I don't even need to speak of my love for the next guy I'm going to mention because you love him more than I do, Rope Hintz.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there's one of your key centers. I thought they've bridged the gap with the veterans like Ben and Sagan really well. You get another find in Thomas Harley.
The aforementioned Miro Heiskanen.
And then get another find
Mafia,
and then get another find with
full effect.
and then get another find with Harley on the blue line too, to go along with it. And then even down to you've got to trade a piece to get Rantanen, who could have been easily part of your long-term future and been just as successful or whatever. But at the same time,
Stankoven was already a good player for Dallas.
Right. But at the same time, not only did you do all of those things, you took a player who I think is one of your best draft picks of the last 5 years by far, and turned him into now by far, in my opinion, what is going to be the best contract in the league for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know why you can trade Logan Stankoven?
Because you got Wyatt Johnson.
Wyatt Johnson in front of him.
And there's nobody, yes, 1,000%. And seriously, get used to hearing it. The Wyatt Johnson contract is going to be one of the best contracts in the league for the next 5 years, because as that cap goes higher, you're going to love the fact that you're only paying that guy $8.4 million.
What did I say? Did I compare that to the Nathan MacKinnon contract the second you sent the details over?
You might have, yeah.
The Nathan MacKinnon 6.1 or 6.8 or whatever that number was that everyone agreed for like half a decade was the best contract in the NHL.
Yeah,
Wyatt Johnston just signed it and it hasn't even taken effect yet.
Right. That if I'm not mistaken, am I right about this? I'll double check it if I'm not sure, but like that the MacKinnon contract was still in that territory when they won the cup too. That's what he was making when they won the cup.
Yes,
and then obviously he had to get
he had signed his extension already, but it kicked in the following year.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was going to say he obviously was going to get paid. And I know, by the way, in case you need any proof, well, guess what? It's still a good contract even after he got the giant pay raise because I put on the day after the trade deadline was over after watching the game that I got to watch on Saturday afternoon, which was certainly not as entertaining. I watched the Colorado-Toronto game, and you're getting down to crunch time. Colorado's on a power play, and there he is. Someone tell him to clear a spot in the trophy case, by the way. He probably should, right? Because
he's stupid.
Well, the points title's coming his way. That's for sure. And then you might want to clear some space for a Hart on your shelf too, probably.
Well, and he already got a Conn Smythe that cup year, didn't he?
No, it was Cale was the Conn Smythe that year. Cale Makar won the Conn Smythe that year.
Man, if they win another one, Nathan MacKinnon's getting the lifetime achievement no matter what. The Sidney Crosby Conn Smythe, as we call it.
Very funny. Anyway, back to the draft picks for a second. So now those are the 3 first-round picks, which are all currently 24th and higher. It's not bad.
Pretty good.
Then I get to the second-round picks. The lowest of those picks, or the highest, however you want to, I guess, look at it, right?
Picks.
The best of the picks is still the Flyers' own pick.
It'll be 36 or 37.
39th.
39, yeah.
Is based on where it is now. It just so happens that the next team directly in front of you right now is Anaheim. So that's 40. Then you have the other 2 picks that are remaining. Columbus's, which is 50. And the team right in front of Columbus is Calgary, 51. So 7 picks in the first 51. You know how many teams probably have even 3 or 4 picks among that grouping? Not many, obviously, because there's 31 other teams trying to divide up at that point. What's the number? 44 other picks between 31 other teams? You're lucky if you have your own 2 picks. They've got 7.
Right. And there is, again, a possibility that not all of those picks are used, that some of those picks are combined to move up, that some of those picks are combined and moved in a package for an asset.
Now, I know this is a touchy subject, especially in this city. But this is as close, and I will use these words carefully. I understand how people feel about these words right now, but it is as close as you can get to trust the process.
Absolutely.
The amount of draft capital you now have is through the roof. Not only this year, but guess what? I even looked it up based on just the handful of 2 other trades they made over the course of just Friday. And now you got 2 extra picks in the first 3 rounds of 27.
Absolutely.
And in no certain terms, when he was asked about it after the fact, Danny Briere basically said that 27, we're okay pushing it down the line because we don't even know if we're picking.
I was going to say, I don't want those picks.
No, but he's taking it for the purpose of teams love first-round picks. We could be sitting at the deadline looking to be the other side of the equation and say, guess what we have? We have Toronto's first-round pick. Would you like it? Maybe by that point, Toronto's window's closing.
If I'm Danny Briere, what I'm doing is maybe I'm even taking all 7 picks this year in the first 2 rounds. Probably looking for opportunities to move up and kind of get some more premium picks in the top 12 if I can, but even the top 20 or so.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I might even take 4, 5, 6 picks out of that 7 and use them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's your future. Those are your prospects that you develop to maybe one day make your roster. Those are the prospects that you develop to flip for assets in the future. But I think this is your stock up draft. And then if there's let's just say there is an offer sheet this summer.
Mm-hmm.
And it involves giving up your first round pick this year. Obviously, there can be some bigger ones that get into multiple picks, but I'm just going to stick with 1 first round pick for now. I think you're okay with that because you just drafted 6 players in the first 2 rounds. You know what I mean? You have this whole cupboard of prospects that you just picked. You're a little more okay giving up next year's first for.
Okay, see, I was making sure I was on the same page with you because I'm sitting there going, it doesn't affect this year's firsts, correct?
No. That's what I'm saying. Is you take your 5, 6, 7 picks this year, and then
you're okay with the 26 first going somewhere else if you feel the need to jump in an offer sheet too. Yeah,
exactly. And because adding a Gabe Vilardi or God, I wish Wyatt Johnson hadn't signed that contract, but Gabe Vilardi.
I'll still. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'll throw one out for you because he scored a nice goal on Sunday night. If for some reason you think you can throw some money at Mason McTavish, say, tell me I'm wrong. That's the age range you want to be looking at.
No, and I like McTavish a lot because he's built like a horse. But
he is,
dude.
And what a big guy. Definitely.
You're telling me he's not going to be a successful center in the NHL for a long time to come? Come on. He might be Jamie Benn, but
listen, with all due respect to some of the players that they have out there, there's a part of me that sits there and goes, of course they can be successful in whatever if they could just get the hell out of Anaheim. Kind of. I'm sorry. I think McTavish is all-star material if he could get the hell out of that area.
I think they're very close to turning it around at Anaheim.
You say that, but there is still an element where they don't know how to use guys, and it's not helping the situation with guys like I thought I heard something about how Owen Zellweger doesn't like the situation he's in right now, and that could get ugly. You don't want to piss players off in the process.
I agree. I think management has to listen to your players at some point, and I think a coaching change would go a long way in Anaheim.
Yeah, that's probably on the docket for after this year, if we're being honest. I mean, at this point, why bother? But
he was just voted the most hated coach in the league by the Athletic Players poll. That's why.
Oh, I didn't catch that whole thing.
They hate him.
Was that a different question than the one I would least like to play for?
He was both.
Oh, was he really? I thought Tortorella was the top of the. I wouldn't like to play for that guy.
Maybe you're right. I'm thinking of something different. But there's stuff coming out of Anaheim that the players don't necessarily love the situation there.
Oh, I know they don't love the coach, and that's why I think that's end of season done for. Yep.
And 1000%. I think if you put a Jay Woodcroft on that bench,
that's not bad.
Give him a training camp to really cook with all those young kids.
I love where you're going with that, except for one problem. Do you know the type of team that's going to hire a Jay Woodcroft or of the sort?
The Rangers.
No, it's a team we already talked about. How about the Boston Bruins? Because I could see that.
I'm pretty sure they're hiring a dude with a mustache, but.
Oh, you think in Boston? You thought that about the Rangers too.
Okay, I think they're going to bid for his services, frankly.
Well, let's put it this way: in Boston, in particular, that fits more of what I was trying to say. They were with the retool thing that you get a coach that is very high profile. That sure as hell would do it. For better or worse, I guess.
We are more than 50 minutes into this show. We should probably mention the other couple of Flyers trades.
But we did. We mentioned that they got traded. We didn't talk about the deals.
Kuzmenko to the Kings with salary retention. Flyers receive a 3rd-round pick in 2027.
Mm-hmm.
Erik Johnson to the Colorado Avalanche, 1-for-1 for Giovanni Smith, who it's a favor to Erik Johnson. Let's be for real. Danny Briere said as much. Erik Johnson said as much.
I think. Did you
It's an
send it to?
opportunity for him to go win a cup.
Did you send it to, or at some point put it in the group, or was it in the group at some
Probably.
point about that Giovanni Smith fought Erik Johnson earlier in the year in the preseason?
I
No,
don't
that
know
was
if
right.
I said it.
That was
regular
regular season. I mean, yeah, I'm
'cause
sorry.
Giovanni
It was San Jose.
Smith,
San Jose.
Giovanni Smith hit Michkov.
No,
And
you
Erik
mixed
Johnson,
it up with him
or
before
not
face
fought,
off.
mixed it up with Michkov, and then Erik Johnson fought him on the ensuing face-off. Yep.
Right, and well, Erik Johnson pushed Michkov out of the way and was like, "No, kid, get out of here. I'm going to do
This ain't happening. I'm taking this one.
Right,
Yeah.
and stepped up for him or whatever.
Hilarious.
Guess what? That's another guy you won't be seeing.
No, Giovanni Smith will very likely
Ride it out in the
jam.
minors until the end of the year.
Yep. And listen, when he was coming up, I liked Giovanni Smith. He had a little bit of potential. Hasn't really lived up to it.
Has snarl to his game, obviously.
He's a really fun player. Well, honestly, listen, if he ends up and like he has been through.
Well, you know
most
where
of
he
his
was
career,
for a little while, right?
Where's that?
Dallas. He
Oh,
played in their system.
You're right.
He played
You're
in
right.
Dallas's system for a while, and that's what you're probably thinking of. That it felt like a good fit for them.
He seems to be one of those like quad A guys.
Yeah,
And
he is.
And but his style, if he adapts a little bit, he's going to be a really good AHLer. Like he's got that physicality.
And maybe you think about bringing him back for that purpose, I guess, to fill out an AHL spot if you really want to. I don't get the sense that
I do not know this. Yeah, I don't know the state of the Phantoms at the moment. So,
well, right now they're in a playoff race.
Are they really? Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. Playoffs in the AHL is a little funny business to begin with because 6 teams out of 8 in the division make the playoffs to begin with, or something like that.
Yeah,
so
but only like their division. It's weird.
But the Phantoms were at last check anyway. They were 5th in the division, but they also were like within 4 or 5 points of 3rd. So they're having a decent little year with some of the guys they have.
If only they had like a really high end goaltending prospect who could be playing games for them. Wouldn't that be nice?
Now they do.
Oh, right.
Now they do, and apparently he won a game on Saturday, something like that.
Good to see.
Anthony Richard scored in the final minute of the 3rd period to win the game for them. So that was another marker. Like every so often I catch them like, oh, they beat Providence tonight in that way, or they beat one of these other these high profile AHL teams that typically are always doing really well because they just always have a bunch of prospects and good AHLers, and they're like hanging with some of those teams this year. So they're a fun little team when it comes down to it. And obviously now we got to admit they've taken a little bit of a hit themselves now because you had to pull some bodies up.
Right.
So Ulil Excel and Rodrigo Abels and Emil Andre not being there.
The real question is, did Danny Briere fail in his role by not sending Matvei Michkov down in paper transactions so he can play in the AHL playoffs?
No.
I know.
No, especially when you consider how much that kid has played already. You let him take a vacation as soon as the season's over.
Go to Santorini, kid. Spend 3 weeks in Greece.
Well, hey, he went on some trip somewhere after the I think it was like Dubai or something like that. It
was 4 Nations. He was in Dubai.
Right. No, I knew when it was. I'm saying he went somewhere and came back looking great. So and guess what?
It was Dubai. Yeah.
Yes, because apparently that's just a very popular destination in general right now.
And I will say that is also one of, I don't know this to be the case, obviously, but that is one of the places that Russians can get to a little bit easier.
Yeah, I know. Fedotov went there one point in time.
So he may have had some friends or family meet him there as well.
Very possible. So let's do this for a second, because I have written down in front of me anyway the entire scope from all the trades that Danny Briere made, including the January one.
What just was this year though? Okay.
Right. What was acquired and what has been traded. I know there's a longer list, believe me.
I gotcha. No, you're fine.
So they traded Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost, Scott Laughton, Andrei Kuzmenko, Erik Johnson, a 2025 4th, a 2027 6th, and a 2025 7th to get back Jacob Pelletier, Nikita Grebenkin, Giovanni Smith, a 2027 1st, a 2025 2nd, a 2027 3rd, and a 2028 7th.
You know what else they got that list doesn't include?
Go ahead.
Cap
Cap
space and
space.
financial flexibility.
Yes, a lot of it. I mean, right away. Well, okay. So while we have while we have this banner up too, because that to me is actually the bigger deal. Like, yes, you flip Andrei Kuzmenko and get a 3rd round pick. You know what? Why I'm calling that the bigger deal though, because as long as he was on your roster through the end of the year and kind of doing some stuff, played 7 games, had 5 points. It's not like he came here and just did nothing.
Solid player, yeah.
Right, had a nice little, handful of games with him before getting traded.
Yeah, frankly, I was starting to advocate for keeping him if they didn't flip him at this deadline.
Right, now it was going to have to be for way cheaper than 5.5.
Of course.
But that's why I'm saying, to me, what that trade represents is, even with retention, because obviously the retention's gone at the end of the year anyway, so who cares? It's that 5.5 is legitimately gone now. Instead of trying to figure out what percentage of it goes back into keeping him, is it 2.5? Whatever it may be, it's just gone. And I don't see them bringing him back. Despite the fact that they said they could revisit it, I don't see them bringing him back. So because of that, it's 5.5 more. And then, so now take that and put it with the, what's it called? The 7.5 mil it's supposed to go up.
Well, and
$13 million.
One quick note for those of you that might be thinking, oh, maybe we bring him back because Matvei Michkov, they got along really well, the Russian, blah, 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 blah. The prospect received in the Toronto trade, Nikita Grebenkin, we did not really mention this at the time, we kind of glossed over him, has essentially grown up playing alongside Matvei Michkov, not necessarily together, but they've
supposedly
known each
tight
other for a very long time.
They're supposedly tight. It's not more than just know each other.
That's what I'm saying, is they're apparently very good friends. I don't know if they ever played together, but they have gotten close. So
yeah, they definitely weren't on the same KHL team. I know that much.
That is worth noting. I know I talked about kind of the locker room culture recently, and it looks like we might be heading for a little bit of a Russian era, but I mean, it worked for the Florida Panthers, so
right. But you've got all that. You've got the cap space thing going.
Barkov
for sure.
To the Flyers when?
Who's that?
Barkov?
No, I don't know about that, but
I could only dream. Oh my God.
Yeah, you and everybody else who wants a number 1 center, I hear you there.
There it is. That is a top 5 center in the NHL.
But okay, so now that we have touched on, and we touched on the Erik Johnson one as well. And by the way, I think that is, I didn't really bring it up too much in my appearances on anything or in articles or anything like that, but it's been brought up a couple times, and it's a really good point. Scott Laughton gets traded finally, and you trade him. You can trade him really anywhere, but you trade him to put him close enough to home. It's his hometown team. His wife's family is from there. They had a family tragedy earlier this year, so you kind of do. This is that whole do right by the player thing, and you follow through on it. And Erik Johnson basically told Danny Briere, the only place I'll go back is Colorado. Otherwise, I'm fine staying here. I'll mentor your team next year. I don't care. I will do whatever it is you want to be around because I love it here that much. And he does right by the player.
I'll show up in the background at every game preview on the website.
Funny story about that, by the way. I don't know if you saw this one.
Yep.
Okay, well, then I'll say it for the listeners then.
Yep.
That the next day when they did the preview for the Seattle game, when Brian Smith does the video preview, he was in the press room that's downstairs, and behind him over his shoulder was the Erik Johnson 1000th game T-shirt, which was one last little nod to the cameo of Erik Johnson making one more appearance, it was really cool. But this is the type of stuff that when teams are, especially if you're a free agent eventually, and you get to pick, where do I want to go? What team is going to take care of me? And look out. Players remember, hey, did you see that thing that this GM did for Erik Johnson?
Yep.
That sounds like a guy I'd want to play for. Or did you see how they took care of Scott Laughton? And not only like when they moved him to a place where he would have wanted to be, where his family is. They took care of him in that respect. It's done respectfully, all stuff like that. Players do remember that type of stuff, and it's a very important aspect of it for sure.
And as a younger GM who is still kind of forging his reputation in this league, that is a great thing for Danny Briere to establish early on, is that he will be taking care of players.
Right. Well, and now, so while we're on the subject of Briere too, I want to give Danny Briere a lot of credit for this whole week, and really the previous month as well, honestly, because I think that a lot of people were prepared, and we talked about this a little bit before, were preparing themselves for Scott Laughton is still here. That they just felt like the price wasn't met. We're not doing this. He's too valuable. We're not trading him. And you were going to have the same situation as you always do. And this isn't to center it around them moving Scott Laughton. That's not where I'm giving him the credit for. What I'm giving him the credit for is basically doing, and like I said about the message that it kind of sends for the rest of the season, it's going to be ugly. You're not going to have a great team for the rest of the year. You took a lot of pieces away, had to fill it with minor leaguers. It's going to look a little rough, right? You're not going to win a ton of games out of these final 17 to go. And the players kind of seem to realize that also. Like, that's also what this represents. It's not just about the person leaving. It's, you know, the team is what it is. We're obviously not making the playoffs. And the reason I want to give credit is because it's really easy to look at all of the other negative angles of this thing and build off the frustration. The 5 years now you haven't made the playoffs. The way that this season has gone and it, it's not panning out. Some of the different, like, Cutter Gauthier not working out, or the Carter Hart thing, or something, all the bad luck, all the negative, you're frustrated, you're tired of it. And Scott Laughton was kind of, to a degree, kind of the face of that to a sense, because that was really his entire career, was the years that they just weren't the greatest. Like, yeah, they had a few playoff runs. That's not to say they never made it there, but more of his years as a Flyer were not.
You're saying Scott Laughton did play in the playoffs.
Yeah, I know. I heard all about that.
It was really funny.
I couldn't believe
about Leah Hextall on the broadcast.
Anyways. I know. But, I mean, for God's sake, the guy has an overtime playoff win.
I know.
Probably, if we're being serious, probably his finest moment as a Flyer. Scoring that goal in an overtime. I know the shame of it is to sit there and say that and figure out or have the realization that nobody was there to actually witness it in person.
He was
because the way he celebrates that, you wanted a building full of, that was a game 5. It would have technically been a home game. Can you imagine Wells Fargo Center seeing?
Stop.
I know.
Stop. It's painful.
Anyway.
Stop. They were the best team in the league going into the COVID shutdown. Stop.
But okay, so that's perfect segue for what I was trying to get to with the credit for Danny, because it's if you do nothing or don't do the thing that it seems like it's right in front of you. And I even said they didn't have to do this right now. I could have understood to a degree why they wouldn't have moved him. But I also kind of kept in the back of my mind, we talked about the Rantanen trade, that there was something other. Look at what Carolina still managed to get back for Rantanen, all things considered. Look at what the Brock Nelson trade turned into. Look at what the Tampa-Seattle trade was. Some pretty ridiculous price tags on some stuff that you have to kind of acknowledge. Is it the best time to do this? And if we don't do this now, then who knows what we're going to get for him? And of course, you also have to weigh what happens if he plays next year for the Flyers instead and gets hurt, or his value tanks further, and you missed the boat on a seller's market. Credit to Danny Briere for finding that offer that was okay. Thank you for giving us kind of what we were looking for. The only piece of the Laughton deal I didn't love was the retention. And it's not like it's huge retention, and it's only 1 year, but you just don't love that it eats up a slot. Yeah, that's the only thing you don't love about it.
I think that indicates, as well as the retention on Kuzmenko. So right now the Flyers are currently full. Cannot facilitate any weird draft day trade. Like, there is a bit of a but as it sits right now, I think you're in a pretty good spot. You don't have your retention spots, but I think that indicates more than anything that Danny Briere is looking ahead. That we have hit the turning point.
Right.
That it is now time. It is no longer time to ship assets away and retain value just to drive prices up. It is now time to be the ones acquiring, and the other team is going to retain, and you're going to pay a little more because they're going to, maybe not specifically, but that's the sort of move that maybe a little bit of a philosophy shift moving forward.
Let's think about it this way too. If you don't move him now and wait another year, and therefore burn year 2 of Matvei Michkov in the process, you're one step closer to that contract needing to be extended in some way. He needs a new contract.
And that one's not going to be cheap.
No, of course not. But are you also preparing yourself to kind of sit there and like you're saying, to move the process a little faster here so that you're in a position to start trading some of this stuff potentially, if that's where you want to go, instead of, well, in another year we might be able to get that first round pick instead. Like, you got a first round pick. Sometimes you just take the first round pick you got. You got a nice product. Like, look, is Grebenkin number 1, 2, or 3 in the Toronto system? No, but is he top 10? Yes. Got a nice little.
Is he top 5, 6, 7 in the Flyers system immediately upon coming in?
Probably 5.
Probably. Yeah. I saw
depending on what you're considering a prospect. Yeah, I would say
I saw a lot of lists putting him on a similar level as like a Denver Barkey.
Yeah.
As far as where he ranks in your system.
I also compared the trade to the Claude Giroux trade a little bit, because when they traded Claude Giroux, the first round pick was 3 years down the road. They traded him in 22. They didn't get a 22. They got a 24. And which is ultimately one of the 25s when it comes down to it, because they didn't trade it.
Yeah, they did flip
it. But you get my point. It's like you pushed the first round pick way down the road. You got it wasn't the top guy that everybody was eyeballing when it came to prospects. You got somebody a little further down the list who turned out to be something that worked out for you.
Absolutely.
You take a flyer on a guy like Owen Tippett. You take a flyer on a guy like Nikita Grebenkin. Maybe something happens. It's worth exploring. And then, and I think at about the same age, if I'm not mistaken, too. Correct? Like when they got Tippett, he was 21.
Yeah,
I want to say, or something like that. Yeah, because it's somewhere in that range. Because Tippett's only 25.
Something like that. And I will say, I think he is probably one of your contenders. I know they've kind of mentioned that no one's going to replace Laughton's A this year, but going into next year, I got to think Owen Tippett's one of the guys they're looking at.
Possibly. I lean towards, I've said Nick Seeler's a guy I could see them giving one to.
You think Travis Sanheim gets a letter at some point?
That was the next guy I was going to say, was probably, he's probably high on that list for sure. I can't really think of any other forward really besides, like what you're saying, besides like a Tippett type or something, because you kind of start to teeter into, like, let's face it, with all due respect to how good the kid
early
could
to
be,
give Noah Cates.
Maybe not, honestly, if they feel like I think that they wouldn't see him as vocal enough for it, to be honest. Like, he's definitely leading by example, don't get me wrong. It's not that. I was gonna go the other.
You never know. You never know. He shows up at camp next year. He put on an extra 5-10 pounds of muscle. He comes in a little bit. Maybe he plays his way into a position where they give him an A next season.
I don't know why. I feel like that's almost a certainty at this point that he's going to show up like that. I feel like he just wants to keep getting better.
Well, and I think he has already shown that he can be a 2C. I think this is the offseason where he attempts, I don't know if he'll do it successfully, where he attempts to make a run at being a 1C in the NHL.
Well, he already is the 1C right now, if we're being honest.
Oh,
so
you know what I'm saying.
No, I know.
One of the 32 best centers in the NHL, let's put it that way.
Okay, well then let me put it to you in a different way then. I don't want him to be the 1C if he's one of the 32 best in the league. I want him to be like, if let's say there's 20 centers better than you are, but that puts you on the second line. I'd rather have that every day of the week, course. Obviously. Like
you want to have Gino Malkin playing behind Sidney Crosby? No kidding.
But I think that Danny Briere sees it that way, is my point. Like, let's get somebody else in here. And let's be real, by the way. There's the Noah Cates element of that, but there's also going to be the Jet Lachenko angle of that too, who's competing for it. And Lachenko played a game against Edmonton earlier this year and didn't look out of place being put on the ice with Connor McDavid.
I agree.
That matters to eventually down the line. And Barkey's going to be pro next year by that point too. Like, you got all these things to factor in. It's you're going to have guys who should make some noise here.
You're going to trade for Elias Pettersson. He'll be there fighting for that spot too.
We'll see about that part. But I genuinely believe that there's a chance that. See, and I'm not trying to manifest it, but I feel like I've heard enough of this guy's name to think it's a realistic possibility. I really think they make a possible run at Gabe Vilardi.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And like I mentioned,
and that would be a guy
you're primed for one of those offer sheets.
Sure, absolutely. So we'll see where that type of stuff goes. But again, I want to give credit to Danny Briere for having this kind of trade deadline where I don't want to call it full fire sale because it wasn't like you were selling like to bare bones minimum like that, but you pretty much moved every piece that was logically able to be moved. And it's why, for the life of me, as much as I think I had said this on the last show, Rasmus Ristolainen is kind of the poster child of the retool because he was acquired for a first round pick during the Fletcher era. He was re-signed by Fletcher. He was, he's still here even after Fletcher's long gone. Yep. People are constantly looking for, even as he's grown to probably be a, suitable player based on the contract, honestly, for the way the cap is. Right. Yeah. Right. The contract is actually aged better than people want to admit for his ability and for what he's given you and his growth under Tortorella.
I think the player has taken steps to make sure that contract is aging well, for sure.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that I think there's a number of people who just focus on how he got here and why he's still here and make the connection between the previous general manager and go, Danny, just do whatever it takes to get rid of him.
Right, exactly.
When the coach is trying to give you a message of, I don't know where that comes from, because if you got rid of him, you'd wonder where that next guy is who's like him the next day. And I understand that sentiment as well. I'm just saying, I can't understand how you would be disappointed that he's still here after all of this stuff. If it was him and Laughton's here and you had a shot to flip Kuzmenko and didn't, and I'm not even worrying about Erik Johnson because I don't think anybody even thought that was going to happen. And especially
Erik Johnson didn't, apparently, by the way. He was surprised and apparently very
emotional about it.
Yeah. So good for Erik Johnson, I guess.
Well, because he never left. He still spent his summers in Colorado.
His starts in Denver.
Yeah. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you had to ask, I'm not trying to throw shade with this by any stretch, but if you had to ask him, where did you enjoy spending more time? The part of the year he was in Buffalo or the time in Philly? He would tell you Philly.
And I think if he ends up in the media and it ends up not in Colorado for some reason,
which I think it will, by the way, but I get your point.
Absolutely. I think this was his internship year for all intents and purposes.
I think that for something like that, he could put the president of hockey operations and the ex-goaltender, current broadcaster who does national games on speed dial and ask for tips for his post-playing career. Absolutely.
I think Erik Johnson will be just fine.
What is it about, by the way, what is it about, like, even if they've only been there for a small period of time, ex-Flyers who end up in that field in some way? Because there's a lot of them around the league. Jody Shelley's doing it. Like, you think of a guy like that, and he's good at it, by the way. Like, I want to make clear, like, these are guys who are good at it.
One of them was so good at it, he turned into a president of hockey ops job.
That was a lot based on connections, though, too. That's a guy who just knows everybody.
They're all based on connections. He's the connection for all the guys you just mentioned.
Yeah, sure, of course. Anyway, all right, back to the other stuff. Yes, we're over Erik Johnson's post-playing career.
Absolutely. So, you gave Danny Briere his flowers, and I kind of wanted to do the same. I think he has done a pretty excellent job over the last, almost 2 years now, reforging the roster, cutting a lot of he did a good job of cutting what I think a lot of the problems were while not giving up on too many players too early. Because I'm sure there's a temptation to come in and just turn everybody over and start fresh with your guys. And he has taken Chuck Fletcher guys like the aforementioned Rasmus Ristolainen and rehabbed his value to the point where he was able to ask for a first and a prospect plus this trade deadline. And he didn't get it, but he had it there, and it, chose not to move the player, whatever, anyway. But I think he has done a good job of evaluating. He's talked about the fact that he has spent a lot of time evaluating. And I think the future roster is starting to take shape. Obviously, there are still some holes to be filled, like 1C, 1D, 1G. But we're getting there. And I think the tear down portion of the rebuild is pretty close to over.
Well, and that's why I think that the whole situation was significant, that you did pretty close to as much tear down as you could at this deadline. Now
Absolutely.
people, I think, feel more confident. Like, and that's why I'm saying I understand people are going to immediately jump and throw Ristolainen into that group where it's like, well, almost tore it all down kind of material. And it's like there's certain things sometimes that you're kind of just stuck waiting it out. Nobody was going to be able, especially when you had no retention slots left, no one was going to be able to take the $5.1 million he's still on the books for the rest of this year. You want to talk this in the offseason? You might have some takers potentially if that's where you want to go with this. And
Absolutely.
it's the same for the people who ask about or who say stuff about Sean Couturier's contract. I know what it amounts to, but it's not
No one's
getting
got that
moved.
much
He's got a
time.
no move clause, and he's making what he is to, after the injuries and all that stuff like that. You just kind of got to ride some of them out. I personally don't care if Sean Couturier is the fourth line center when it's all said and done. That's sometimes just how it plays out.
In 2 years after Claude Giroux retires, we'll trade Sean Couturier to the Ottawa Senators.
I'm doing the math in my head because I'm trying to get to how far into the contract that is because you're still going to be a lot of it left, but you might, who knows?
Right, but regardless, so there's 3 retention spots. Obviously, at this point, all of the Flyers are full. Kuzmenko's frees back up after July 1st.
Yep. I
You
mean,
will
that
have
was the
one.
biggest no-brainer of them all with retention. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But just moving forward, you'll have 1 retention spot next year. You do have some dead money. So next year, there is still a little chunk of dead money on the cap, but a lot of that frees up after next summer
Well,
or after next season.
one of the things that I would also or at least suggest to consider now, and listen, this will depend probably based on what kind of deals you have out there, or if you have anybody that you
Of course.
try to get on a 1-year deal that you can kind of sense, if next year is going a little like this year and you're not there yet still, even though you're trying to take the steps towards it, like your draft, you have more draft picks that you've made now where you, okay, got this piece, got that, like your answer to the one goalie thing. I think you have the guy already. I just don't think he's coming anytime soon, but I think you have him.
I think if you're going to be serious about making the playoffs, which it sounds like they're going to try to start doing next
Oh,
year.
for next year, you mean?
Yeah, I don't think the tandem you have is good enough. And even if it's
It's not.
even if it's a shorter term solution, like last summer when Linus Ullmark was available, something like that, where you can get a guy, say, hey, we're going to sign you to 3 or 4 years. You're going to be our guy for the first 2 while the young kids come along, type of thing. I don't mind something like that, but I
Well,
don't know
now
what's
that
going to be out there.
okay, so let's. Oh, I'm gonna go look it up for you right now. See if I can find somebody who intrigues me in that respect, because I don't. Right about now, I have no idea what Ivan Fedotov's future is. I know he's got 1 more year on the contract, but who the hell knows where that goes? Ericsson's
I
gonna
would
be
be,
here,
yeah, yeah.
and if we're being realistic, after the whole saga with Kolosov happened, assuming he's still even here, the real right answer is next year. You know what's happening next year? He should be splitting the net in the AHL with Carson Bjarnason,
I
who
agree.
goes pro. That's what it
Quite,
should be.
quite frankly, I think Alexei Kolosov has fumbled his bag pretty hefty.
Oh,
I think
sure.
this could have been his opportunity to start 50 games in the AHL and prove yourself as a dominant AHL starter because you're competing with Cal Peterson who's making too much money.
To
Next
what?
year, you're gonna have to split the net with a guy who's younger than you and just as talented, if not more so.
So let me look at. I'm trying to in my head. I'm not trying to project anything or anything like that, but I'm
Mhm.
trying to look at guys who aren't making a ton of money as a goalie right now. Who like not the highest profile of guys, but is there a goalie or give me like a comp for somebody that you would accept as a other half of a tandem with Sam Harrison?
That's your Demko.
Okay, wow, I think you're really shooting high then. Demko's not available, obviously, but you're shooting
No,
with
no, no,
guys
no.
who.
Yeah. I want a guy who's won 20 games at the NHL level before, or something along those lines. Like I don't want to go with a Cam Talbot who's been here before, or a Peter Mrazek who's been here before, or like that whole chunk of goaltenders.
Mhm.
There's 50 of them, and they're pretty replaceable. And I think that's what you
Well,
have
that's why.
already. Like I think Ivan
Well,
Fedotov can do that. I don't want
nah,
that.
They've
That's what I'm
struggled.
saying,
No.
man.
What I'm trying to get at is that I'm looking at names on here that if they could play halfway decent, could win a solid number of games, unlike some of the stuff you're seeing from others, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
you've seen guys who just haven't been able to win a game, and it's always like an adventure. Like, I'll give you one of the names that's on here right now who would be a UFA, and he's making $1 million this year, and he's on the older side, so it wouldn't be a long-term deal, I would imagine. But would you take a David Rittich to bridge the gap between the young guys and the minors?
Like, here's the thing. When you say, would I take a David Rittich? Is it better than what they have? Yes. Is it good enough? No.
But I'm not necessarily worried about looking for good enough to like be it, because I feel like the names you're giving me are the guy you put in and you think about possibly having that guy for when you're ready for the cup run.
But I want a guy who can start game one because I don't think Sam Erson's that right now. Like,
Fair
I'm
enough.
okay with it. I'm okay with a tandem. I'm okay with Sam Erson playing 35,
Okay,
40
fine.
games.
Fine. I'll elevate you one step further. It's not going to be the best example because he's had his own share of struggles at times. But you want a guy who I feel like can start game one of a playoff series if it came to it, then I'm giving you a guy who has started a game one of a playoff series in the past. Would you take an Ilya Samsonov? Okay, then there we go. See, I'm looking for the level. I was looking for the got to give me the litmus test here of where we're trying to go. Now he won't take the years though. That's the problem.
You ready?
Go ahead.
John Gibson.
Oh, don't start there. I've only been hearing about that for God knows how long. No, but I've only been hearing about that for God knows how long, and I'm sorry.
Now the difference that now there's a viable name behind him. Well, in front of him, frankly, Lucas Dostal is a real actual goaltender.
Yeah, huh? Yeah,
all of a sudden, John Gibson's pretty expendable, man.
Oh, I'm sure he's expendable. Guess what? I got another one who's lined up, and for me, they're identical to me because I think you've got a goalie who could easily take his place. Same situation, just what you were saying with Dostal in Anaheim. Same situation. And what's the other thing about John Gibson's game, or not really his game, but about him? He's always hurt. He's always hurt.
When he's starting 60 games a year, sure.
No, I know, but now it's going to be a problem because you had to set that precedent because you had nobody, and now you want to shift to the tandem thing, and he could end up on the shelf 1 week into the year. You know what I mean? Guess who the other guy is?
That really could be Ryan Ellis 2.0, couldn't it?
Well, not only that, but see, I'm not even saying for a second I was thinking the same thing here. It's the other name who actually because you're right, Gibson. It would have to be a trade. He's under contract, but there's a guy who's a free agent who fits the exact same description. And there is somebody who's right there with him, I'll call it, who could easily be the starter next year for this team. It's Freddie Anderson. Always hurt.
Valid.
Team, can give you the good appearances, but hurt a lot. Has a guy right there with him in Kochetkov.
Yep.
Like, you've got it's that to me, it's an identical situation, and he is a free agent.
I like Frederik Andersen a lot more than a lot of the names that we've kind of talked about here.
I mean, listen, there are
as
also
far
guys
as the free agents go.
There are also guys up here who are making a crap ton of money for a goaltender who probably doesn't play a whole lot. That if they were willing to come down, I would actually entertain it because they all have been legit goalies. Like, guess what? One of them just beat you the other day.
Okay.
Jake Allen's a free agent.
Okay. Oh, Jake Allen. Okay.
And I get it. He's going on 35 years old. I don't know you're signing a 35-year-old, but okay, fine. No, but okay, fine. Then I'll go. Well, no, then I'll go one step further. Then what about Ville Husso?
Okay. I don't mind Ville Husso.
Early 30s. Am I bringing him in for $4.75 million? No.
3 by
but if
3?
I can get him, I don't love the 3. Like, give literally
3 years or $3 million.
Kind of both, honestly. I was going to say, can you give me I'll tell you what, can you go somewhere between the two goalie contracts they have now? Give me 2 years between what is Erson, 1.75 or 1.5 or some number that's really reasonable, and then Fedotov's is 3.125, I think. Can you get me in the middle there somewhere at 2.25, 2.5 for a couple years?
I don't know if you're going to be able to look Ville Husso in the face and tell him he's making less than Ivan Fedotov.
That's if Fedotov's here, is what I'm saying. You don't know.
Well, you'd have to ship him off at that point. But all right,
unless you have his rights, and he's
fair enough
somewhere else.
Fair enough.
You never
All right.
know.
Listen, he's already been kidnapped by the Russian government once. We don't need to.
Oh, well, nobody
Sorry,
said
too
that's where.
soon.
Nobody said that's where it had to be. He could go
I
play
know.
he could go play in the Swedish league for all I care.
I got you. But all right, I think that is a good place to put a pin in our trade deadline discussion here. Let's
Yeah,
briefly touch on you mentioned it the other day that the Flyers got beat. Turns out that was a theme. Flyers are 0-4 since our last show. We mentioned a 7-game homestand taking place over the span of 12 days. They've lost the first 4, so it's not going great. And it, frankly,
it won't for a little while.
Nope. And like you mentioned, the Thursday game felt a little bit like the end of an era, a prologue to a funeral. Like, I don't know exactly how you want to phrase that, but it seemed like it was in the air.
The reason why I'm kind of making a comment on this because the night that Claude Giroux played his 1000th game and everybody knew what was coming when the next one was going to happen, they wore the alternates. And it felt like they should have come out on Thursday wearing the alternates because instead they did that Saturday. But
well, I'm
but my point
is he asked for the black jersey.
He might have. I have no idea. What I'm getting at is that to play off of your word there, that type of stuff gives that vibe. It did really you knew something was probably happening. You just had a sense. I can understand if you're a fan and a listener and you're sitting here going, I wasn't going to believe it until I saw a deal in place. Oh, I totally get that. But you could just tell from the vibes, like there was even something with after the anthem was over, that Travis Konechny turned towards Laughton and kind of gave him a tap on the pads right away. And like you could just feel the vibe from right then and there where it was like, they know. They all know, and he's gone.
They knew since he tweeted the picture.
Well, that's why I said the word I used for him was acceptance. You know it's possible, and you're gonna agree to it.
So Thursday there was kind of that hanging in the air, and obviously the team just kind of played poorly. Like they'll tell you that it wasn't an excuse.
Well, on top of the way they played, Winnipeg's top line sure looked like Winnipeg's top line.
You're playing Winnipeg, right?
Oh, I'm trying to figure out which one of the three had the better game.
It was crazy. They
probably Scheifele, but like Velarde had a really strong game right along with. Like, remember the thing I said last? Remember what I said last show after they won in a shootout against him, and it's like, oh, you're focused in a little bit more on Velarde sometimes because his name's been floated out there as an offer sheet possibility. You couldn't miss him in this one.
Possible, and it was quite an audition if they do end up going down that route in the summer. But then you get to the weekend's games, and we'll talk about Tuesday in a second. But you get to the weekend's games, and by this point, Scott Laughton is off the roster.
So is Andrei Kuzmenko.
Andrei Kuzmenko is off the roster. Erik Johnson is no longer, taking
a reserve
and sitting in the press box.
A scratch.
And it
with quite the look, by the way, when he's sitting in the press, he's got his glasses on. He's like, he looks like $1 million up there.
It's very funny, but then as far as
that's what and that's what his cap hit was. So it makes sense that he looked like $1 million.
And then as far as the on ice product goes, it really took a step back over the weekend. You could tell that the guys were a little bit shell shocked, a little bit upset,
with Saturday in particular, because you're still reeling from Friday. Sunday, I think they just played a team that plays a certain style, and now unlike when you played them 3 times in January, or maybe the first 2 times, if we're being real, you didn't have the horses this time like you did before to actually finish the job. And the frustration is mounting because Travis Konechny hasn't scored more than 2 goals in 24 games now, I think it is, or something.
Yep. And then we did also have a little bit of a Matvei Michkov benching scandal during the weekend. Makes a mistake on the first Devils goal, turns the puck over, leads the first Devils goal. He sits basically the back half of the first period. I think it was the last 8 minutes and something.
Yeah. I think it's less, obviously, this story is less about the actual, like in the grand scheme of things, truly, in the grand scheme of things, I don't even think the benching is that big of a deal. He made a clear-cut mistake and then sat for 3 shifts?
Right.
But it's the principle of the matter, because here's the thing. First of all, number one, and this is justified from a fan perspective. You just sold. You're going to miss the playoffs for the 5th year in a row. This kid is everything to your future. It's probably the only reason you're still tuning in right now. And the coach is making a point. And your answer is, what is the point? You're not going to make the playoffs, so just play him through the mistake. And I know it was only
I get why that is the fan sentiment.
Well, that's what it is. That's what it is now. It's more like, that's why I'm saying it was more acceptable when you were benching him through, well, we're still trying to be competitive. He made a mistake. I got to teach him something. And the best way to do it, like through the healthy scratches, through the other time, like, and maybe this is also why, like, I'm going back to the article I wrote on it. And I don't typically write articles on post-game pressers too often. I didn't even do it when he kind of flipped his lid in Boston over the officiating, and I don't teach my team to dive. Maybe I should, all that type of stuff, like we had. But it was like, after I put the quote in and the clips in there and all stuff like that, after I have all that, I wrote down, like, in the article, he's been a healthy scratch for 2 games this season. On January 30th against the Islanders, he didn't play the final 9:58 of the second and all of the third. January 27th against the Devils, didn't play the final 13:04 of the third period. December 28th against Anaheim, he sat out the entire third period. So it starts to become a pattern. And this might have been like this is actually, because it just straight up is. It's the shortest one of them all. And even Tortorella later, and this was the question that got cut off in the presser, was about, because Charlie O'Connor was asking the question, was basically starting to go down the path of, you said a couple weeks ago when you sat him last that you, in hindsight, wished you had put him back in the game. That it happened in the second period. You could have just sat him out for the final 9:58 of the second and played him in the third. Especially after, by that point, Frost is done for more reasons than one. Partially semi-injured, also on the trading block.
I was gonna say, we found out since that he had some pretty severe headaches and was on his way home.
I think he might have been home already by then. Honestly,
He
I think he just booked it. But those other 3 games, aside from being scratched 2 times, are the only 3 games of the year that he's played less than 10 minutes. So they're the most noticeable. Like, when I went and looked at his game log and found the 3 games with the shortest ice time that are all below 10 minutes, I was able to figure out by going back to the time on ice sheet that all 3 of them had the same thing in common. He got benched. So when it happens on a regular, consistent basis, it's already frustrating. But I think people accepted it at the end of January for, you kind of don't know what you are right now. You're still hovering in this playoff race, so I can understand you're trying to put an emphasis on, you made a mistake that led directly to a goal in this game or in this situation. I've got to try to do what I can to win the game, and I just don't know if he's – let's also remember, at the end of January, they were coming up on the last handful of games before the 4 Nations break, and he was hitting a wall. So
and that's – here's where I have a problem with all the hubbub and all the criticism about just play him. Couple things here. He got scratched for 2 games earlier this season. Everybody lost their minds.
Yeah.
How do you look the first handful of games coming out of it?
Yeah, I know. He responds well to it. I'm not taking it.
Shot out of a cannon, looked great. He has responded fairly well to a lot of these benchings. He has come back strong the following game, or not always.
No, I mean, even on Sunday, he doesn't play the rest of the first period. He looked way better in the second period.
Exactly. And he had a turnover that led to another goal later on, but that was much less of an egregious error. That's just one of those hockey plays that happens.
Sure. Now, the counterpoint that most people are going to make to what you're saying is, then, okay, if he's an example for one mistake, where's the example for anybody else who makes a mistake? But it's different, but it's different circumstances.
Right.
Those, I forget.
John Tortorella has said all year long, that he is not coaching Matvei Michkov for this year. He is coaching Matvei Michkov for his development.
Right.
He has said that consistently.
Well,
he is setting this kid up with the tools to be a successful NHL player.
But let's put it this way, and I didn't even have to watch their show to see this. I overheard Charlie doing a spot after the game on PHLY anyway, because he's not sitting terribly far from where I'm at when he's doing it. And he brought up a good point about that Elaine Vigneault would used to sit there and say when he was coach, that some guys have more money in the bank. That the guy who does a lot more and makes a mistake, he's not getting that treatment because he's got money in the bank. Well, what do you do with
to draw upon?
Yep. But that's why a guy like Travis Konechny can make a mistake and has the track record of you've done enough other things. I'm not going to just take that away from you over one mistake versus the rookie who came in, who even though he's second on the team in points, is still building that part, especially with a coach who's so fixated on defensive style. You really have to earn that money in the bank with
Absolutely.
this coach. So
and frankly, I think Michkov's response, the fact that he does bounce back, the fact that he does take these benchings and scratchings really very well, is earning him money in John Tortorella's bank
to a degree.
As far as a deposit with interest.
Now, here's why it has the reaction that it does. I can tell you exactly why it gets, and it's not just because it's Michkov and he's like the only thing left that's really worth watching for the rest of this season. It's not just that part of it. Let me read the quote, and then I'll pull out the part that I think means the most to this situation or to how a fan is going to perceive this. Because he cut off the question. He goes, just let me tell you guys something, okay? There are a number of things that come into play, not one specific play, okay? And you are at a disadvantage because I'm not going to give you information. It's not always the play on the ice that I'm trying to teach. So use that as a context before you start all your BS. I'm cleaning it up. There are so many things that go on, and with me trying to develop that player, and I'm going to continue to do it the way I think it should be done. But don't just look at the play. No, he didn't do the job as far as back checking. No, he didn't do the job in the offensive zone. But there are a number of things that come into play. And again, I need to show you the respect that I'm not going to give you that information, and you don't realize that. So don't make a bigger deal than you think you need to. Now the end is just him putting his foot down on please, what he's, and here's the thing.
Asking me about it.
Which is the irony of the situation, because it's just going to make us ask about it more. That's the whole point. Everybody wants to know what's this information. And okay, you don't have to be willing to give it, but you're going to get asked about it. The part that I was going to highlight, though, was use that as a context. Because this is my point with, so what's the context? You just sold at the deadline. You're not making the playoffs for the 5th year in a row. This kid is the biggest talent you've got on the team. That's supposed to be the end-all, be-all of your future for right now until there's more surrounding him. And he's getting benched in an otherwise meaningless game toward the standings. So where is he? And that's the context that people are going to take when he's trying to tell you there's other context that goes into it. It's not just the one play you saw, but I'm not going to tell you what that context is. So don't start with your crap. But everybody is going to start with their crap because you won't give us any information. So it's left to speculation.
It's one of those things where I think everyone in this situation is doing their job. I think John Tortorella is doing his job, coaching, teaching, mentoring the young player.
Well,
I think the media is doing their job by asking the questions, but
I
also think that John Tortorella is doing his job by not answering them and protecting his player.
Well, because here's the kind of crossroads that this situation meets, if you will. Okay, because this was the second kind of interesting post-game presser that John Tortorella had this week, no less.
Yep.
The first one, though, is not designed to be about anyone in particular. He comes in after they lose a game to Winnipeg. The trade deadline's the next day, and he's going to get ahead of something with, let me lead off, guys. I said what I wanted to say in the room, and anything I say up here is not going to help matters. So I'm just not going to say anything on it. And now in that answer, he has not thrown a single individual under the bus. He's saying the team and I talked, and I'm leaving it at that. So it's for me and the team.
And what is acceptable.
Well, but what that does, the effect that has as someone who's in the room for the press conference is we all start looking around at each other going, I guess there's nothing else to say, because he's just people think that kind of answer is not answering the question. You actually gave more of an answer than you actually maybe intended to give, because by saying what you said, we don't need to worry about what exactly you think of it now. You're not going to break it down. You said what you had to say. You want to leave it in there because it does no good to say it in front of the media. That's all we needed to hear. And we move on. So nobody asks another question. Then you go into the one on
purpose.
Well, sure he did, because he comes in with that motive. I know how I'm going to get ahead of saying something I regret. I'm going to put my foot down and say, like, the funny part is, I was thinking about this before we started. It's a kinder way of saying all the things he used to say when he was coaching the Rangers, where he would come in and go, I'm not taking questions. Here's what you get. We sucked. And this is the, whatever. He's now doing it in like a kinder sort of way where it's like, let me lead off here. I'm like, basically the loose translation of what he said was, if I answer questions honestly, I'm going to say something I regret. So I just think it's better if I leave what I said in the room and we don't do this. And everybody kind of has no choice but to shut up, and he walks away.
I will say, spending that 1 year in the media between Columbus and Philadelphia,
yeah, it kind of did do something for him.
It did wonders for John Tortorella's media training. Now, it hasn't been perfect.
No, and here's the thing: when you get to Sunday, though, now you've got to be a little bit more careful, because it is clearly about one player. He's clearly trying with that answer to get ahead and say, you guys don't know enough about the situation to even speculate on it, because you're going to sit there and hit me with, what about the play that after the fact he's benched on? It's not the play. And then the easy follow-up question from any of us would be,
well, then what is it?
Well, then what is it? And he's already telling you before you even get to the follow-up
that he's not telling
you. You don't have that information, and I'm not giving it to you. So basically, don't ask. Now, there's no sense in asking any follow-up right then and there, because he's already come in with, like, we're not stupid. He's not stupid. He knew he was getting a question about, he didn't play for the last 8:50 of the first period. Where was he? What's the deal with that situation? He knew that was coming. And it's why he took one question on the matter, gave kind of a short, simple answer, and then as soon as there was another directed about it, it's, let me cut it off because I don't want to talk about this. And he gets out of there with that. Now whatever happens Tuesday morning before the game, morning skate, if it's brought up again, maybe you get a different answer because it's practice. Good luck asking him questions like that after a game when you just lost again. The frustration's boiling over for him too.
Totally. And the other
you don't want to be losing.
The other thing about Torts, like, he's coached in New York, he's coached in Canada, he has dealt with high-end, huge hockey markets. He knows what he's doing.
Didn't way back, if I'm not mistaken, didn't way back when he was in Vancouver, because obviously it was a long time ago at this point, wasn't Elliot Friedman still doing that on a more local basis? Like, that was his team to cover? Because I think there was one, unless he was there for Hockey Night in Canada. There's a clip where he says something about, like, it's Elliot's phone, I think.
That's that clip. That was Elliot Friedman in that clip.
I'm pretty sure it is, because and that's what I'm saying. It's like, I think this is way before, like, he was already breaking. I'm not saying he wasn't breaking news, but it was like, this was before he's sitting, let me be the guy. By the way, did you catch the video that they put out behind the scenes video? Yeah. I love stuff like that. We need so much more of that also.
Absolutely. That man had a day. Said he slept like 3 hours the night before, and
he
that
popped
was probably
up his screen.
Probably not 3 consecutive hours.
He popped up his screen time 2 different times during that video clip, and it was pushing. The first time it was pushing 20 hours. The second time it was 21 and a half hours. And he even admits, which is funny, self-deprecation is great, admits that's embarrassing.
Yeah. In the sports media world, I have like the little babyest, tiniest toe into this pool with this podcast. You obviously are, at least ankle knee deep. You're in there.
I have a little more money in the bank, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And every trade deadline, it seems like Elliot Friedman is fully submerged, to continue my analogy here. Like, it is all the insiders, man. I respect Chris Johnston, Elliot Friedman, Pierre LeBrun, Kevin Weeks. all of those guys just do
Well,
spectacular work.
and Weeksy's totally different because he had like I'm not
A
like
little different,
he
right?
well he breaks his news in a totally different way, obviously for
Of course,
one.
but
But
you know what
but
I
but all
mean.
but also I don't know like yeah, I hate to be using this. This might be the name of the episode, Money in the Bank. I've said it like multiple times. He he doesn't have as much of that yet from a breaking news day. He's broken a lot of stories accurately, but I don't think he
Okay.
has enough like that, like to be on the level of Elliot Friedman and stuff like those are still your go-tos. You see like and listen, I only did this because of the fact that it's easy to get fooled at this time of year, obviously, even though I think I've got the foolproof way to figure out that it's the right account and it's real. Friedman puts out ranting in Dallas. I'm double checking, triple checking, making sure. Is this the right account? Is this not some sort of hoax thing? And it was right. It was accurate, and it was the right. It was the not the verified. It was the one with all the followers. And I'm like, yeah,
Right.
that's it. Okay, so that's really
Crazy.
going to happen then, isn't it?
Yep.
Like, you take it at its word. But certain and that's like, I wonder how this like to go to this story about again with the Michkov Tortorella thing. Let's see how this evolves over the rest of the year,
Yep.
like even over the next day or so, because it's just part of the equation. And I think people are also feeling a little robbed of, the style that Tortorella wants to play, what he's trying to teach to a degree is taking away from having a kid that's all flash and probably, who knows, maybe he runs away with the Calder because of all the points he's able to get. Like I saw they just put out like a panel vote, I guess, that they do on the award races on NHL.com or something like that. And I saw who won among the voting. And I thought, I'll just use a word that gives away who it is because if you know which team he plays for, you'll understand by this word. My immediate thought was typical.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was Lane Hudson, huh?
Yeah, and I just
um,
like to
listen,
me, if you legitimately want me to pick a winner today, I'll pick Celebrini. I think he's been the
yeah,
better of the four guys to this point. And actually, I don't even know if I would put Hudson
frankly,
second. I think I
I
would
think
put
I'm
Wolf
picking
second.
Dustin Wolf. Yeah. I
I,
listen,
I still think Celebrini gets the edge because he's missed time and he's near point per game, but I think Wolf is not far behind. And I would put Wolf second, especially, you know what? That also changes heavily if they make the playoffs.
I was about to say I'm pulling up the Western Conference. Yeah, they're currently in the second wild card spot. If they make the playoffs, that's Dustin Wolf, man. Okay.
The guy who's going to be playing starting game one. Speaking of guys
Mm-hmm.
who start game one of a playoff series, he might be doing it as a rookie.
Absolutely.
Very true.
Yep. So, okay, we have a quick little looking ahead segment here. I know we mentioned that the Flyers are in the middle of this 7-game homestand. It doesn't
Yeah.
get easier. It doesn't get easier these last 3 games because you have Ottawa, Tampa, and Carolina, who
If
at
you're a
this point
fan of
are all in a playoff spot.
if you're a fan of the draft picks, you're probably looking forward to this week a little bit for what it could
It's
represent.
Listen, if you are a fan of the draft picks, it is officially time to start scoreboard watching for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Seattle Kraken.
By the way, if you want me to fuel the fire here a little bit, the Buffalo Sabres beat the Edmonton Oilers on Monday
There it
night.
is. There it is. All right, and then
Don't forget, by the way, that now they're within 6 points, 2 games in hand, and you play them twice down the stretch too.
yep,
It's a lot of points up there. That is not out of the question.
absolutely. And then next Monday, the Flyers will play Tampa, which means we will be recording on Tuesdays. We will be a little bit delayed next week. But
I
yeah, other than that,
wonder what that show is going to be about.
that show might be about 0 points over the next 4 games.
No,
Um,
I was going straight to the looking ahead of the next show we're going to do, and basically just highlighting who they're playing next Thursday. That's probably what the whole show is.
Fair enough. And we will find other things to talk about. Don't get it wrong. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. We're at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso everywhere except for Blue Sky. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video. Yeah, other than that, I think we covered just about everything. If you are listening on audio, we appreciate you. Make sure to hit subscribe. Consider leaving us a review. Consider checking us out on YouTube. Um, Kevin, anything else you got today? Anything else to dump the notebook out on the trade deadline?
No, not really. I mean, we didn't highlight a ton of some of the other ones that went on around the league per se, but you know what? It's because we've done that so many times before because the Flyers haven't given us enough to talk about that we have to do the around the league stuff. We had a lot to talk about with them that it only made sense.
Yeah, and we'll touch on around the league stuff next week. I think we'll really start touching on around the league stuff as we get into our playoff previews a couple
Playoffs.
of weeks
Oh
from
God,
now.
yeah.
So, yeah, make sure you're subscribing to us. Get back here for our playoff coverage. It's a lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're getting close to.
I would say we'll see how that goes though too. I mean,
We'll have playoff coverage, I promise,
oh,
even
I
if it's
know. I
just
didn't
me.
say we wouldn't. I'm saying we'll see how that plays out schedule wise as it gets around a little bit.
Absolutely. So, speaking of schedule again, we will be back next Tuesday, Wednesday, as opposed to this week, Monday, Tuesday. Make sure you're subscribed and follow along. And until then.